All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Arts and Education Information Session. It is Thursday, July 31st, and it is noon here. My name is Lizzie Morales. I am the Arts and Education Program Director and Accessibility Coordinator at the Maryland State Arts Council. I am a white woman with curly brown hair that's currently half up, half down, and it goes to about my shoulders. I have brown eyes, and today I'm wearing a dark green shirt. And behind me, my background is slightly blurred. I'm joined today by my colleague, Kirk Amaro Snow, who is our Grants Management Associate and Roster Assistant. And Kirk will be providing us with tech support as well as monitoring the chat as needed. Thank you so much for your support today, Kirk. Before we go into today's content, I'm going to lead us through our introductory grounding slides. We open all of our public meetings and events with these slides. These grounding slides are reminders of how we can show up in our virtual space and community today. You may be familiar with these slides if you have joined us at other MSAC events and public meetings. So today we are using the Google Meet platform for our information session. On your screen are the features of Google Meet. This toolbar may look different if you are calling in from a phone. At the bottom left are the time and meeting information, and in the bottom center are your controls that include the mute, unmute button, and we ask that you remain muted throughout today's meeting unless you are speaking. The camera button, which you can turn on or off. I'll be staying on camera since I'm presenting, but feel free to do whatever you are comfortable with today, on or off camera. Then there is also the closed caption button, which turns computer-generated closed captioning on and off in order to support today's accessibility for the meeting. Also, in keeping with State of Maryland guidance on generative AI, please do not use AI meeting assistants of any kind. So any virtual assistants that are appearing in the meeting will be removed. There are the emojis that are available by clicking on the reactions button. That looks like the smiling face emoji. There is a raise hand function, which we will use when it's time for questions. And then there's that red button with the phone receiver where you can leave the meeting. And on the bottom right are a few other features, including the access to see meeting information, the participant list, and the chat feature, which looks like an icon that looks like a word bubble. And then going back to the More Options button, the three vertical dots that's in the center of your screen, if you click on that, that will allow you to change how your screen appears and access other features. Next, I'm going to read our land acknowledgement statement, which was developed in consultation with tribal leaders around the region. We acknowledge the lands and waters now known as Maryland are home of its first peoples, the Accohonic Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Chopticabee Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nashu Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Youghiogheny River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that a reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. If you want to know more about land acknowledgements, please check out our Land Acknowledgement Project resources on our website. This project was led by our state folklorist, Ryan Coons, and I'll go ahead and paste a link to this resource in the chat box. Next is our equity and justice statement. The arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council is committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organization and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, class, language, and/or ability. Our vision at the Maryland State Arts Council is to play an essential role assuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. The Maryland State Arts Council advances the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. This past year, we adopted a new strategic plan. MSAC strategic plan has 5 pillars that are indicated in the red bold font, and below each pillar is an action that I'll read out loud. Access. Bolster access to arts experiences and resources. The next pillar is awareness. Amplify stories of Maryland's arts sector and the value of public support. The next pillar is connection. Foster networks within and beyond the arts sector. Equity. Cultivate a thriving arts ecosystem centered in equity. Leadership. Commit to a culture of care and innovation. And if you'd like to learn more about our strategic plan, I will place a link to that also in the chat box. So our next slide is our creative meeting actions, where we will all celebrate being in a space with other creative people. We will engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge that together we know a lot, enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, share your idea and trust that it'll be heard, use I statements, focus your language on the task at hand, hold one another accountable with care, honor all perspectives and build on shared ideas, and balance speaking with listening. So throughout the year, we offer professional development webinars and participate and host various events such as this one. Those include these information sessions, topic-specific sessions, coffee with the council, and there's actually a coffee with the council coming up on August 12th. We also have office hours, and this is where staff from the Maryland State Arts Council and sometimes with staff from Maryland Humanities, we go out to different regions in Maryland. We get to talk with all of you. There's also the Maryland Art Summit, which is hosted by Maryland Citizens for the Arts and typically takes place in June. So, please keep checking on our professional development page for new events. And if you have ideas for events that you think people would be interested in, please share your ideas with us too. And I'm going to put some links to that information in the chat box right now as well. Ways to get involved. So the Maryland State Arts Council relies on a diverse array of constituents from across the state to give input in a variety of ways on our program. So we use panelists, and they typically will review and score applications. We have editors that will give input on program policies. All of our public calls are listed on our website on our Ways to Get Involved page. And what you would do is you typically apply in our Smart Simple, which is our online application software. We do provide training and support and compensation for the service. We currently do not have any panelist opportunities at this time, but please do check back in a few weeks because a couple other programs are probably gearing up to put out their calls for panelists. And I'll just put this link in the chat box so you can see where it is on our website and even bookmark it in case you're interested for future opportunities. Okay. So good afternoon again. I know some of you are joining us while I was going through the grounding slides. And if you just joined us, again, my name is Lizzie Morales, and I'm the Arts and Education Program Director here at the Maryland State Arts Council. And on your screen is our agenda for today. So we just reviewed our grounding slides. Next, I will briefly discuss our Poetry Out Loud program. I'll update you on the teaching artist roster, and I'll spend the majority of our time together sharing information on the Arts and Education grant. Then I'll be taking questions at the end. Sometimes the questions end up getting answered as I move through the presentation today. And there's a lot of information that I'll be sharing with you all. So I'll be talking a lot over the next hour, and I may pause to take some sips of water. My colleague Kirk will be monitoring the chat, but if any questions that come in while I'm presenting, I'll likely have to wait until the end of the presentation to be answered. We also are recording this webinar, and the slides will be posted to the website for future reference. I do plan to stop the recording before we go into questions. And on this slide, there is an image on the right side of the slide. That is a photo of Deborah Means. This is an artist that works with Arts for Learning Maryland, and who is holding a framed photo and wearing a microphone headset and is telling a story at a family event in Charles County, Maryland. All right, let me take a sip of water and we'll get into it. Okay, poetry out loud. So again, most of today's presentation will be focused on the Arts and Education grant, but I did want to briefly share information on Poetry Out Loud. Poetry Out Loud is a national poetry competition for high school students. It's a national program that is co-presented by the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Poetry Foundation, and then it's implemented at the state level by state arts agencies in all U.S. states and territories. So the Maryland State Arts Council, we host the regional competitions and the state competition. And these competitions do require poetry judges. So we do have a public call for Poetry Out Loud judges, typically in October. And so if this is a program that you're interested in learning more about, please feel free to reach out to me. Also, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for announcements on when applications will open and deadlines, especially that call for judges. The website for Poetry Out Loud will be updated with more information in the next few weeks. And on the right side of this slide, there is an image of our 2025 Maryland State Champion, Penny Tofik, who is from River Hill High School in Howard County. And she is reciting a poem at the 2025 Poetry Out Loud State Competition, which was held at the Carew Smith Performing Arts Center in College Park, Maryland. So the Maryland State Arts Council has a teaching artist roster. This roster recognizes Maryland teaching artists and their professional contribution to the arts education field that really deepens learning. The teaching artist roster is a list of Maryland-based teaching artists who have experience providing group or classroom arts instruction and/or performances in a variety of educational settings. Artists are vetted through an application and panel review process. Now, some of the benefits of joining the roster include being highlighted on our MSAC Arts Directory. Any artist or arts organization is actually welcome to join our arts directory, but teaching artists on the roster have a specific arts and education filter that's added to their profile and helps schools and organizations search for teaching artists on our roster. And teaching artists on our roster are eligible to apply for arts and education grant funding. And then there is an annual teaching artist showcase. We just had our second teaching artist showcase at the end of April. And this was a 2-hour virtual event. We highlighted 13 different teaching artists from the roster, and each artist presented for about 5 minutes on their work. And we had a really nice audience and turnout. And we hope to continue to find ways to show off our teaching artist talent in Maryland. And the image on this slide is teaching artist Melissa Foss blowing into a clay flute during an instrument making workshop at Maryland Hall in Annapolis, Maryland. So during this next year, we're actually going to take a pause from accepting new applications. We really want to take some time to evaluate parts of the program. We do not plan to change the purpose of the program. So this program revision will really focus on more procedural elements of the program, such as application questions and materials, the requirements to remain on the roster, and processes to update our teaching artist information. The image on this slide is artist Slim Harrison, who has a neck holder with several wind instruments attached and a banjo across his torso. And this photo is from an instrument making and dance residency at the Banner School in Frederick, Maryland. So this next slide shows us the phases and timeline for the teaching artist roster program revision. We're currently in phase 1, where we are researching current practices. And with the help of Lenore Kilner and Lillian Palin, who serve as program consultants, we have been reviewing teaching artist roster applications and procedures in other states and other organizations. It has been actually a really interesting process to see how other states and organizations approach roster applications and utilize different required materials. Phase 2 will be the public input phase. This will likely look like a survey, a public survey, listening sessions, and individual and small group conversations. Phase 3 will be when we begin to draft and edit application questions, edit our procedures, and bring any policy-related items to the council, which serves as our board, for a vote. And then phase 4 will be the implementation phase. So this is when we build the application in our smart, simple online application software. This is where we update guidelines. And this is also when we're going to plan the communications around these new processes. And the image on this slide is a young girl playing a djembe during a workshop with moving history in Baltimore, Maryland. All right, let's move into our arts and education grant. So the Arts and Education Grant supports teaching artists leading arts learning activities in school and community settings for learners of all ages in Maryland. And on this slide, on the right side of the slide, there's an image of Steve Cypers with Arts for Learning Maryland using mallets to play on an upside down bucket with a student at Prince Street Elementary. Okay, eligibility. So to be eligible for the Arts and Education Grant, the artist must be on the teaching artist roster, and the school or community site must be a nonprofit organization with a 501c3 status in Maryland, a unit of government, such as a public school, public library, senior center, detention centers, etc., or college or university. And the image on this slide is artist Lisa Matthews, who is holding a toddler hand to demonstrate how to play the xylophone during an early childhood music workshop. So this slide has a list of activity types that are supported by this grant: residencies, workshops, visiting performances, lecture demonstrations, out-of-school time programs, online programs, and field trips. Now, field trip expenses can only be supported by this grant if the field trip is connected or part of another one of these activities. You cannot apply for funding just to support the field trip by itself. It must be connected to another activity type. Also, if you're unsure what maybe constitutes a residency versus a workshop, we do have a glossary of activity types posted on our Arts and Education Grant website, and that's under the resources section. And the image on this slide includes two students, one with short hair and one with long hair, who are painting on a board. And this photo is from Resurrection St. Paul's School, where students created a collaborative mural during a residency with artist Kristen Hilberg. All right, let's move into some of the grant details. So the maximum grant request amount per application is $6,000. There is no limit on the number of applications an artist or artist organization can submit. There is a monetary limit on the amount of grant awards that an artist or artist organization on the roster can receive each fiscal year. And this is based on a percentage of the overall arts and education budget. The specific amounts for this fiscal year are still forthcoming. The delay is due to factors that are out of our control. We have been offered funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, and we are in the process of reviewing and accepting these funds. And this year, there has been extra caution and scrutiny and review by the Department of Commerce, which is the department that our agency falls under in state government. I know many people are eager to know the amount so they can begin planning with schools and organizations, and I will email the roster and update the website as soon as I know. So just some more details about this grant. If a grant application is approved for funding, the full amount of the grant award goes to the artist or the artist organization on the roster. The artist or the artist organization is considered the primary contact and applicant. They are the ones that are responsible for the grant and required reporting. The grant funding does not go to the school. Schools and organizations may participate in up to 2 grants per fiscal year, and our fiscal year is July 1st through June 30th. There is no site match required from the site that the school or the organization. Income from other sources are allowed. For example, the school's PTA may plan to contribute to the residency. I've also seen where sometimes there's a grant from a county arts council or another organization that helps provide some funding to also support the residency in addition to the arts and education grant. And that's also fine. So I just wanted to clarify that there is no site match that is required. However, income from other sources or income from the site itself is okay to help support the project. So grant funds can be used for expenses that are directly associated with the arts learning activities, such as artist payments and stipends, transportation costs, art materials. And actually those top 3 things are the most common expenses that I typically see on applications, but the grant funds can be used for other additional things that are related to the project, such as consultant fees, honoraria, contractual services, hotel or lodging accommodations, especially for programs that are further than 50 miles from an artist residence, software licensing as well. Grant funds may not be used for space rental, institutional indirect costs in excess of 15% of the total grant amount, capital improvements, activities that are principally recreational, therapeutic, or rehabilitative, travel outside Maryland to present or produce arts, projects chiefly for classroom use in school activities. This is something that, if it's something that's unrelated to your residency or workshop or performance, regranting, scholarships, and political contributions or lobbying activities. If you are unsure about an expense, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask in advance of submitting your application. So how to apply? To apply for an arts and education grant, first the artist and the school would, discuss their services, the scope of the work, their availability, and rates. And then you agree to collaborate. Then we need to have a point of contact at the school or organization. This can be referred to as a site coordinator or some type of coordinator that serves as that primary point of contact at the site or from that school or organization that the artist is working with. Then you begin an online application in Smart Simple, which is and Smart Simple is our online application software that we use. we ask that the rostered artist or organization begins that online application. And this is because they're considered the applicant or the primary contact on that application. And if the grant is approved, they become the grantee. And so while the artist should begin or open that online application, the site coordinator or anyone else involved in the project may be added to the online application as a collaborator. Collaborators have access to view, edit, and submit the application. And this is optional. The collaborating school or organization can be as involved or as not involved in this process, which I'll also discuss a little bit more in a moment. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about Smart Simple, which is, again, is our online application software. To access the online application, you can log into Smart Simple by going to our website, msac.org. And you can either click on that top bar where it says Smart Simple, or you can click on the Apply Here button, which is on our Arts and Education Grant webpage. Those both take you to the portal. If you do not have a Smart Simple account already, you'll be asked to register for one. And if you have one, you would just want to log in with your email and password to access your account. Okay, so as I mentioned, the collaborating school or organization can be as involved or not as involved in the application process, but we do require evidence of support from the collaborator demonstrating that they're aware and on board with applying for this grant. The file that is uploaded to the application should include the following information: the name and title of the representative from the collaborating school and organization, the artist's name that they'll be working with, and it should be dated in our current fiscal year. We also have a letter of intent template available on the Arts and Education Grant website. And this is an optional template that is available to use as a resource and can be helpful to school administrators with limited time. A principal letter on their own letterhead is also fine. Email correspondence can also work as long as the correspondence includes that information needed. And we really only need one file to demonstrate that support. This application prompt is for eligibility purposes, and I look at this to make sure that all parties involved in the proposed project are aware that this grant application is being submitted, and this prompt is not scored by the panelists. And next, we're going to go into our application prompts. So there are 5 application prompts that are scored by the panel, and each are out of 10 points. The questions are, describe the proposed arts learning activities, describe the objectives of the proposed arts learning activities. For in-school programs, include references to state standards or learning competencies. Describe the intended audience and how the objectives will align with the audience's needs. What is the timeline of the proposed arts learning activities? What is the budget for the arts learning activities? And so these are the same questions on the application from last year. And over the next few slides, I'm going to go through each question, the evaluation criteria, and some things to consider when responding to this prompt. Before we get into those specific tips, I did want to provide some general recommendations when writing grant applications. One is to spell out acronyms at least once. Avoid using links to websites or other materials. Panelists are directed to only review the information within the application. Approach the narrative as if the reader is not familiar with you or your work. Maybe considering asking a colleague or friend to review or proofread the application. They can help clarify if something feels unclear to them. So it's just sometimes it's nice to get another perspective if that's available. All right, so I'm going to go into each question. So the first question that is scored It prompts the applicant to describe the proposed arts learning activities. And an excellent response to this prompt is to include a description of the proposed arts learning activities that is clear, specific, and thorough. And when you're writing your response to this prompt, I recommend making sure that you're including information on the content and instruction. I recommend including details on how the arts learning experience unfolds and, really help us envision what this experience will look like and what would it be like to be there. Question 2 is describe the objectives of the proposed arts learning activities for in-school programs, include references to state standards or learning competencies. So an excellent response to this prompt would include a description of the objectives, standards, and or competencies that are clear, specific, and connected to the proposed arts learning activities. So some things to consider when writing your response to this prompt would be, think of the phrase, after this workshop, students will be able to do what? So think about what the students will be able to know and do by participating in this arts learning experience. Also, make sure that the objectives clearly connect back to the proposed arts learning activities. Also, to help support this prompt, we do have a resource available called Instructional Standards and Competencies for Teaching Artists, and that can be found on the Arts and Education Program webpage. And, I'll just note that everyone who registered for today's session will receive a copy of these slides, and you'll be able to click on the links that you see within the slides. So the next question, question 3, describe the intended audience and how the objectives will align with the audience's needs. An excellent response to this prompt would include a description of the intended audience that is clear and specific. The objectives, standards, and or competencies strongly align with the audience's needs. When writing the response to this, consider, who is this experience for? Include specifics on the intended audience, such as age, grade level, what are the number of participants, background information, demographic information, and characteristics of this group. And then think about, how does this project address a need in the school, community, or with a specific group of students? Question 4 is about timeline. So what is the timeline of the proposed arts learning activities? Specify dates, even if they're tentative, and include evidence of individual and collaborative planning, implementation, and follow-up reflection with key stakeholders. So an excellent response to this prompt would include a response where the timeline of activities is clear, specific, and realistic, and includes strong evidence of individual and collaborative planning with key stakeholders. So when writing the response to this, consider providing a full timeline of the project, from the planning conversations to that debrief conversation, and include information on the duration of the experience and the frequency of sessions, especially if this is a residency. Include details on the collaborative planning process with stakeholders. And then question number 5. Question number 5 is about the budget. What is the budget for the arts learning activities? Include all expenses and any anticipated income. Provide context and itemize expenses by category and amount. So an excellent response to this prompt would include financial information that is detailed, realistic, and clearly tied to the successful implementation of the proposed arts learning activities. And when you're entering information for this prompt, you might want to consider, make sure you break down and itemize those expenses and be specific with all expenses. Include details of how expenses are calculated, such as artist fees and mileage costs. Now, the remaining questions on the application are not scored, but do provide additional information. So these questions are, is the collaborating school or organization offering any financial support or in-kind support? And if you answer yes to this question, then there's a follow-up question that pops up, which is, please list what support will be provided and the associated costs from the collaborating school or organization. It's helpful to know if the collaborating school or organization is providing any materials or contributing funds to the project. For example, if there is a visual arts residency application that comes in, but there's no art making supplies listed in the budget section, maybe that's because the school organization is providing those materials. So this question helps us understand that. Then the final questions would be the total, you plug in the total budget, program budget, and the grant request amount. Questions 7 and 8, these may be the same number or they may be different numbers depending on the nature of the project. Okay, Title I in special education schools. So this is actually a new policy for fiscal year 2026. This policy is in alignment with the Maryland State Arts Council's strategic plan to support people in Maryland with limited or no access to the arts. And where schools are designated as Title I or special education schools, they will be awarded an additional point on the final application score. And then special education schools are schools that exclusively serve special education students. Underrepresented counties in Maryland. So this is another policy that's part of a larger strategy to uplift our commitment to serving all people throughout the state, especially those from underrepresented counties. So applications from underrepresented counties will be awarded an additional point to the final application score, similarly to how similar to how we add that a point to the Title I in special education schools. And we determine counties as underrepresented counties by the number of applications that we received during the previous fiscal year. So for our fiscal year 2026, underrepresented counties include Allegheny, Carroll, Charles, Dorchester, Hartford, Somerset, Talbot, and Washington. And this provides a modest benefit to applications from those counties that the program would like to reach, and it operationalizes our commitment to serving all people in Maryland throughout the state, or all people throughout the state of Maryland. Okay, so our evaluation process. So this year we're moving from monthly application deadlines to bi-monthly application deadlines. The application deadlines for the 2025-26 year are September 5th, November 5th, and January 5th. All the applications that are received by those deadlines then go through the following process. Eligibility checks by the Arts and Education Program Director, me, which can take a few days to even up to a week. Then applications are assigned to groups of panelists to review. Depending on the number of applications received, panelists are asked to complete the review, typically in about 3 weeks. Once all of the panel's evaluations have been completed, the final scores are returned and the applications go through an internal approval process in order to determine grant awards. And that process can take a few days or even up to a week. And once that process is complete, applicants are then notified if the application is approved or declined for funding. If an application is declined, applicants can request feedback and reapply if they wish. And all these times really do vary. It depends on the number of applications received and sometimes other factors as well. Final reports. So if awarded an arts and education grant, the grantee would complete their online final report by August 15th. If the educational experience is rescheduled or it concludes after that reporting deadline, you can notify me, the Arts and Education Program Director, and we can talk about adjusting that final report deadline to after the experience concludes. Changes to approved applications. So if there's any changes to an application that is approved for funding, please be sure to notify the program director of those changes. And that's really for any grant in any grant that you're awarded at the Maryland State Arts Council. It's important to be in touch with that program director if something changes from your original approved application. We will then check and confirm that the changes are within compliance with the grant agreement form, and then you can proceed with those changes. So some application support and resources. Feedback. We offer feedback in two ways. We have feedback on draft applications, which needs to be typically requested about 2 to 3 weeks in advance of a deadline. That usually would give me enough time to review the application, provide feedback, and give you time to incorporate the feedback. There are times when I do have to decline feedback requests on draft applications, which is usually due to time and capacity constraints, but I usually try my best to meet all requests that come in. As I mentioned earlier, you can also request feedback after the panel reviews the application. So this is a feedback form. It's a compiled list of panelist comments, and that can be used to help strengthen future applications. You get a link to that in, if your application is declined, you get a link to that feedback form request in the declined notification. The Arts and Education information session. So today's session, it will be posted on our website along with the slide deck that I'm using. So you can always go back and reference this video or the slides if you need to. And some other additional resources that are on our website are the full guidelines, which go through all the details of this grant and eligibility, all those uses of funds that I talked about. It gives a little more details on those items. There's the full rubric, so you can see what the panelists are using to score applications. There's a letter of intent template, which again, you can use with that collaborating school or site to just help get the information we need to make sure that they are on board with submitting this grant application. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, the instructional standards and competencies for teaching artists. Okay, so now we still have some time for questions. Before we get into that, I'm going to stop the recording so people can ask questions comfortably without this being recorded. If you are watching this recording and you have questions, this next slide has my contact information. So please feel free to email me with questions, and thank you for watching.